So, just the other day, we got our first gameplay trailer for Pokemon Legends ZA. The response from fans has been pretty decisive. We are proud of Game Freak for continuing to branch out and try new things with the franchise. On the flip side, graphics and performance have come to the forefront of discussion yet again for the series. Some people have expressed distaste for the visuals of the game. Conversely, others very much enjoy them. One thing is clear from an objective standpoint though. Game Freak has learned lessons from their time on the Switch. Legends ZA is their demonstration of that newfound knowledge. There's a lot going on under the hood here. Some things you may have picked up on, others you might have subconsciously noticed but couldn't quite put your finger on. So today, we're going to reveal why that is and what those things are exactly. Now, if you look at comparisons between Pokemon Legends ZA and Scarlet Violet, for the most part, there's a clear improvement in the graphics and presentation here. This is despite ZA being built from the same foundation and retaining the same art style as Scarlet and Violet. Yes, there are some aspects that look noticeably worse, but for the most part, this is definitely a better looking game, specifically with the texture work on environments and the use of elevation. So we're gonna get a little bit technical here. Like Scarlet and Violet, Legends ZA is using a lot of normal maps for their textures and scenery. This is essentially taking a 2D texture and using it to give the impression of three-dimensional depth. Look at any brick or stone in the trailer to see this. Yeah, we already had plenty of these in Scarlet and Violet, but it seems Game Freak has upped the amount of these that they're using to save on memory. Now, saving on memory is super important, specifically in 3D games, and in 2025, especially on Nintendo Switch. When crafting their games, developers need to keep in mind the performance budget. Everything that's placed in their game has a cost, and they can only do so much before that performance budget runs out. Assets such as NPCs, foliage, and structures, technique implementation such as lighting, water physics, and distance rendering. All of this needs to be planned out carefully before making your game because it can be really hard to change some of these things later if you find out that something's taking up too much memory. The sheer use of these normal maps is a good sign that Game Freak is starting with a simpler base to make sure their game can afford the systems and assets that they're implementing, and they can actually improve these normal maps later if they need to, since they're extremely easy to modify by comparison to everything else. This means in future trailers, we might see another jump in visual quality, and that could be because Game Freak finished the game as it is and realized that there's still memory left over in their performance budget to add more visual flair. Most developers work like this, but Game Freak seems to not have used this lesson when crafting Scarlet and Violet. As an example, we can actually compare this quite easily to a game that had a similar reveal to release cycle, BDSP. Say what you want about the game and its quality, but the difference in visuals between the first trailer of BDSP and the second one was massive. You can literally see the difference right here in front of your eyes. The first trailer of BDSP was clearly the simple base crafted just in time to give us a trailer. And the next trailer, and subsequently the full release, gave us gorgeous lighting, improved textures, slightly modified models, and more implemented techniques like depth of field. BDSP had the same time frame from reveal to release as Legends ZA, so we could very well see this kind of improvement for the next trailer for ZA as well. Other ways Game Freak is giving allowance for performance is by removing the realistic textures on the Pokemon and clothing of NPCs. Admittedly, Scarlet and Violet's best visual feature was how we could see scales, fur, and metal sheens so clearly on Pokemon models. We could also see what materials the characters' clothes were made out of, such as leather, corduroy, or cotton. All of that is absent in the current trailer of ZA, and it's done to ensure the performance of the game runs smooth. Now, this is subject to change before release, as like I said, normal maps can be used to convey these things on the models if there is space left over in the Switch's memory. And even if there isn't space left over for the Nintendo Switch, there could be a Switch 2 version of ZA in the works as hinted by certain leaks. So if we do get that version, you can definitely count on that version to include all of these textures and systems that we're talking about or are about to talk about. Speaking of which, you'll notice lighting in Legends ZA looks less realistic and much less appealing compared to Scarlet and Violet's. Once again, that's because another lesson Game Freak learned, how much their previous lighting system was costing them. Here in ZA, they've significantly toned down the use of their physically based shaders. They're now using more simplified shaders. Light now has much less of an effect on the assets it hits in the game, and it doesn't hit anything in a natural way necessarily either. This is because those simplified shaders, but also because they simplified their techniques for things like subsurface scattering. Like, notice how light diffuses as it hits the trees and buildings, rather than creating rays that pass through. It's definitely not as appealing to look at, but all in all, these changes to the lighting are some of the biggest cost-saving measures for performance we witness in the trailer. Yes, the game looks more flat as a consequence, but it's a huge trade-off for the game to run much better compared to SV. And once again, I'll reiterate that these are subject to change if there ends up being memory left over in the performance budget, or if we get that coveted Switch 2 version. Adding to the flat presentation is also the use of a distance fog over volumetric fog. Essentially, instead of implementing a complex system to convey depth of field, Game Freak is resorting to a tactic used back on the Nintendo 64, rendering fog at a certain distance to keep everything close by in focus and make the scenery in the background look farther away without costing much memory. It's literally just a wall of fog that activates at a certain distance away if there are no assets blocking that distance, such as buildings. We see this most when on rooftops in ZA. Continuing, water uses screen door transparency to cut performance costs and also doesn't reflect light, assets, or transparency realistically anymore. If I remember correctly, Legends Arceus also uses this method for water, but what I do know for sure is that Scarlet and Violet didn't use this at all. It used a much more advanced technique for showing reflections in water, and this is why Casseroya Lake and really any body of water in SV were so infamous for chugging the game to a crawl every time you were near the water. One overall improvement we can witness because of all of these memory-saving techniques is how Pokemon models retain their full quality for a farther draw distance compared to previous games on Switch. Pokemon Legends Arceus and Scarlet and Violet would swap out the full poly models for reduced poly versions after a certain distance is reached from the player, and that distance wasn't that far. So sometimes you could actually notice the lower poly models of your Pokemon when you threw them out and walked away from them. Conversely, Sword and Shield didn't even bother doing this at all, which is what led to Pokemon popping in and out of existence at super close distances. This was one of the most egregious examples of immersion breaking in a Pokemon game. It's pretty nice that we didn't have to deal with that in any game after Sword and Shield though, and it's only gotten better here in Legends ZA for retaining the full poly models for a longer distance before they're swapped with the lower poly models. We also get a major performance boost just based on the fact that this game takes place within a city. The reasons this helps the performance is twofold. One is that the map is definitely smaller than Scarlet and Violet, there's no getting around that, even if this one will likely have more intricacies and interactivity. The second is that because of the verticality of the scenery, the game won't be rendering nearly as much around the player at any given point. Having walls around you for most of your adventure means the game won't have to load most assets until you turn a corner. On top of this, verticality is generally just more appealing to look at than flatter scenery, so it's just a triple bonus at this point. And yeah, this is all super exciting, and I'd say it's worth noting that screenshots on the website for Pokemon Legends EA seem to have better textures and appear more vibrant than what we saw in the trailer. I think that's a good sign for what's to come. It's possible that a higher quality build of ZA currently exists somewhere. The best part is that it can only get even better than what we see. So, if you're someone who's currently disappointed with ZA's visuals, then perhaps this can give you some peace of mind for what the future may hold. Again, we might see a jump as big as what BDSP's first and second trailers had. But what changes to the visuals and performance has you most intrigued? And was there something else that I didn't notice that you did? Please let us know down in the comments so we can all talk about it together. Afterwards, check out more of my videos, such as this one here where I discuss how we know a Switch 2 version of ZA might actually be coming. And if you want your name featured at the end of all of my videos and want to support me, you can become a channel member or join my Patreon linked right in front of you. I've been johtojonny, and I'll catch you all there.